Picture yourself facing the Atlantic Ocean in the coastal town of Cherbourg in France. The year is 1912, and you are boarding a giant ocean liner, the world's largest at that time. In front of you is an obvious socialite and passenger of importance, whose friends keep referring to as Maggie. But by the end of this episode, we'll come to recognize her as the legend and Colorado treasure that she is. The unsinkable Molly Brown. It's hard to overstate the historical significance of the Titanic, not only for what the boat metaphorically stands for, but for the stories and legendary figures the event forged from its tragedy. Molly Brown is one of those figures. So let's dive into the story of this famous philanthropist, actress, activist, and adventurer. Explore her connections with Colorado and try and catch the unsinkable vibe of Molly Brown. That's what we're talking about today. And this
is the Colorado Vibe.
Welcome back to the Colorado Vibe, the mile-high sound experience that allows you to hear the sounds, listen to the locations, and discover the frequencies and folk that define the Colorado Vibe. I'm your host, Jake Sanders, and today we're in the uptown neighborhood of Denver, standing on Pennsylvania Street between 14th and 13th, staring at the sunlight dappling the corners and angles of one of the most beautiful buildings in the state, the Molly Brown House Museum. Purchased by James Joseph Brown, nicknamed JJ, and his wife Margaret Brown in 1894, the house is a glossary of Victorian architecture and intrigue. Archways and decorative gables, finials and sandstone porticos, lion statues, and marble sphinxes. It takes a while to take it all in. It's obviously priceless now, but when they bought it for $30,000 in 1894, well, that was still a hunk of change. Margaret and JJ had met and married in Leadville, Colorado in 1886, and Margaret struggled with the decision to marry Jim Brown for love, when she actually longed to find a man of means that could take care of her own family. Finally, she decided she would be better off with a poor man whom she loved than a wealthy one whose money had attracted her. The Browns acquired great wealth in 1893, when JJ's mining engineering efforts helped in the production of a substantial ore seam at the Little Johnny Mine, and he was awarded 12,000 shares of stock in Ibex Mining Company and a seat on their board. In Leadville, Margaret worked the soup kitchens for the miners' families, and after purchasing the Victorian mansion in Denver, she was working the Denver socialite scene and defining her legacy of activism, philanthropy, and passion. The Browns' 1894 move to Denver didn't provide an escape from the silver crash and their new city's social unrest. Progressive reformers began to draw attention to the poverty and homelessness expanding in the outskirts of downtown, and Margaret joined their cause, committing her efforts to social reforms like public baths in courthouses, more public parks, and other city improvements. Margaret's commitment to social reform grew so intense that in 1901 she ran for state senate at a time when the high-profile action defied a common maxim that a woman's name should only appear in a newspaper 3 times: birth, marriage, and death. She withdrew from the race, ultimately, before Election Day, but the experience broke gender conventions and shaped her future pursuits. The Browns' wealth made many things possible: their philanthropy, social life, and another new adventure: world travel. In 1902, the couple embarked on a global tour, taking them through Ireland, France, Russia, Japan, India, among other places. After the trip, JJ was set on retiring in Ireland, while Margaret shared her experiences and impressions on the plight of the Indian caste system in Denver newspapers. And so, while the trip brought them closer for a while, The couple began to drift apart, ultimately separating in 1909, after 23 years of marriage. Part of the settlement included Margaret's retention of the house on Pennsylvania Street and a continued influx of money to maintain her travels and philanthropic activities. Flash forward a bit to April 1912. Margaret is well into another world tour, which now has to be stopped short from news that her grandson is sick back in Denver. It's now that we catch back up with the beginning of the episode, where Maggie is leaving the company of the Astors to board the first available ship going back to America, which just happens to be the Titanic. After the break, we sink an ending on this story and explain why Molly Brown's vibe is more important to Colorado now than any time in history. We'll be right back.
The Colorado Vibe continues, but first, a word from our sponsor.
Since 1977, the Colorado trial attorneys of the Sawaya Law Firm have helped our clients seek justice when they've been injured. I'm Rob Wilhite, athlete, trial attorney, father, and partner at the Sawaya Law Firm. We're proud to put on the Colorado Vibe podcast because we know that serving the Colorado community is about connecting and listening, just as much as it is about seeking justice for our clients. There really is no difference between one lawyer and the next. We all have access to the same case law, but we might not all be equal in the same way we serve and listen to our clients and lead them to successful results. On my runs, I'm always listening to books, podcasts, concerts, music, or just the sounds of nature. So thank you for listening, and until next time, this is the Colorado Vibe.
It was on a Monday morning, just about 1 o'clock, when that great Titanic began to reel and rock. People began to cry, saying, "Oh Lord, we're going to die." It was sad when that great ship went down. Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. Did they build a ship that water wouldn't go through? But God, with his mighty hand, showed this world it would not stand. It was sad when that great ship went down. Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down.
That song was called Titanic by Arlie Baker. It was recorded by the famed ethnographer Alan Lomax in the hills of Kentucky around 1914, and it captures the magnitude of the Titanic, how a shipwreck in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean impacted the lives of people all over the world. And one of those people was Colorado legend Margaret, or Molly Brown. I was lucky enough to sit down with...
This is Andrea Malcolm from the Molly Brown House Museum, and I'm the museum director.
to talk about sounds at the Molly Brown House Museum, how Molly rose from the Titanic more triumphant than ever, and how Andrea believes her unsinkable vibe is in need today. I just want to ask you the quick questions really fast. How does sound manifest itself throughout your day at the Molly Brown House?
I love all of the sounds at the Molly Brown House Museum, and having been there for 21 years, I know a lot of the sounds that are made on an hourly, daily, weekly basis, and know when a sound is or isn't right or isn't a part of our day. One of my favorite sounds, of course, is the air brakes on a school bus as they pull up out front, and then you wait for it, and then here come all the kiddos, and they're so excited to come and see the museum. So that sound is a reoccurring sound in our world. Hopefully we get the kiddos back again. Another sound is just the amazing voices of all of our volunteers who give so much of their passion and time, and knowing their individual voices and anticipating the tour that they're going to give and the reaction our visitors are going to have. And then just the amazing sounds the house itself makes, the creaking of the floors, the the sound that the front door makes when it opens. It's this huge wooden door that's very heavy, and the hinges creak as the door opens every 20 to 30 minutes, depending on when tours are starting. And then the welcoming of the volunteers as they open up the screen door and the visitors responding. And then we also play music in the house that's recorded from musical instruments and players that we have inside the museum. So you have the sound of the music playing, the floors creaking, people walking around, often talking in hushed tones. And then you have the volunteer, giving their tour. We've had to shift all that during the pandemic and with our reopening. So it's more of a self-guided experience. But I love the sound of people sharing their stories in the house, of having conversations about, well, that reminds me of something in my grandmother's house, or we had something just like that growing up. So that's where the house really comes alive to me, is the people and the sounds that the people bring to the house.
Love that. So personally speaking, just as a Colorado resident, what's a sound that you could listen to all day, like just in your life?
I'm sure this is going to sound like a typical response for Colorado, but to me, the sound of Colorado is the sound of aspen leaves quaking. Whether you have them in your yard here in Denver or you're taking a hike up in the mountains, to me, that's just this uniquely Colorado sound. And I love that sound. I also just love being here in Denver in the city and hearing the noises of the city. We luckily don't have actually quite a very noisy city compared to others. So just the sound of the trees rustling and the little bit of traffic in the background, especially as you get closer to downtown. And the way when you're at the Molly Brown House, because it's in such a dense urban neighborhood of Capitol Hill with big buildings all around it, the way sound is sort of muffled because of the built environment is really interesting. But then the sound of traffic gets exaggerated, or the sound of people talking gets bouncing off of sort of the brick walls and the stone walls. And it's really interesting the way the sound plays on Capitol Hill.
Here's a question, and what's your least favorite sound?
My least favorite sound when I'm at work is we have our offices in the carriage house, which is directly behind the museum, and we're up on the second floor, and we're right on and above the alleyway that runs behind the museum between 13th and 14th in Pennsylvania and Pearl. And there's always so many characters, colorful people that come through the alley on a daily basis. And some of them we know from their habits, when they first wake up and have their first cigarette of the day and start coughing. But I would probably say when there's conflict happening in the alley, and you can tell that people are very clearly having a bad day. And, you have to kind of listen and say, is this a moment where I'm going to have to step in or not? What's happening to these people, that their lives are falling apart right in this moment. So I'd say that's probably my least favorite.
Yeah, it's interesting because where the house is located recently from the pandemic, a lot of encampments have started popping up. The homeless problem in the neighborhood has started to proliferate. And as we were doing research for this, it was interesting that Molly Brown moved during the silver crash back into Denver and saw the same thing. And she has this spirit of listening to the progressive voices who are trying to look for social change. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how Molly Brown, especially after the Titanic, turned the tragedy, that she saw into chances to be philanthropic, be involved, get active. Can you speak to the vibe of Molly Brown and kind of this thought of activism versus tragedy versus, action?
Well, Margaret, or Molly Brown, certainly was active here in Colorado, in Denver, before her Titanic experience, helping Judge Lindsay fundraise for his juvenile court system, and working on, homelessness and poverty and children's welfare. But in the aftermath of the Titanic, I think she realized that she had an opportunity to act on a larger stage, both literally and sort of metaphorically. She was interviewed within hours of stepping up off of the Titanic by reporters from all over the world. And you could feel sort of still the shock of the moment in her voice and in her tone. And, but she also said, we have to make this right, and that this is an opportunity to address larger issues. So she used that as her platform and sounding board to tackle larger national issues that were reflected in Colorado's issues. Her friend, Senator Helen Ring Robinson, said in 1914 that, the shame of Colorado is our nation's shame. What is happening here with the miners and going on strike is not just Colorado's problem, it's the nation's problem. And Margaret definitely, echoed those sentiments. She too responded to the 1914 Ludlow massacre. At that point, it was just strikes before the militia came in, and tried to be a voice for the miners on the level of, trying to appeal to the Rockefellers, who were the CF&I owners, to make things right. So she didn't look back from the Titanic, and then saw that she could affect the national vote for women's cause on that level, and rallied to gain women the right to vote, which was passed and ratified in 1920, and took her work in the juvenile court system on a nationwide level, and just really wanted to address all of the issues that she saw around her, many of which haven't gone away, today, as we see all the things happening around us. She was in the 1918 pandemic, and we are in our own pandemic. She drove ambulance during World War I to help wounded soldiers, and we still have conflicts all over the world. And she, worked tirelessly to gain women the right to vote. And we have massive voting rights issues happening around us today. Literally, as tomorrow is our, primary here in Colorado, we're so fortunate to have at-home or mail-in ballots, where other states, the voters are faced with having to stand in long lines because polling places have closed and socially distance and wear masks. So all of these issues really haven't gone away. So I think Margaret would be surprised that they haven't gone away, maybe a little hurt that all her work, was seemingly for naught, but she understood that one person in a moment can affect change, but we need to act together as a society to make systemic change.
And God, that was beautiful. 4 more years, I'm not going to vote for you. When you're saying one person, how important was it? So Margaret had means, and a lot of us maybe don't feel like we have means. What is something we can give that can sort of reflect the values, that Molly Brown was putting down? Is there some characteristic, do you think, that she had that maybe we can impart and use in today's, to face today's societal issues?
I think she just stands as a great inspirational figure in that, even though she had means and used that wealth, to help affect change, that, she was working in soup kitchens before she had wealth, within sort of assigned gender roles for women at the time. You had a limited sphere that you could work within, but money allowed you to expand that sphere, certainly when you weren't tied to taking care of your family and or working a job all day, but I think she would want each of us to act within our own capacity, to make whatever change we can around us, whether that's just, stepping aside so that others can have a voice that they sorely need to have right now, or if you have the capacity to financially support a cause, or if you have the capacity to volunteer, whatever is in your capacity, just do something, to support our social structure and take care of others in our community. And I think that's what's so important right now, is just, letting go of the individual in support of the community. And she would want us to recognize that and act on that.
For links or show notes, visit our website or follow us on social media, and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Colorado Vibe on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, enjoy the vibe.